Hey guys, Lemon02. I'm be doing a Canadian Highlander deck tech and some gameplay. So I will be doing the deck tech first. So if you're not interested in deck tech, please look down at the comments section. And in the comment section, you will find a little comment that has all the time tags for each of the games. So what is the deck that you have in front of you? This is Suicide Black, guys. Suicide Black is kind of an older deck, or the deck concept's relatively old. The deck was initially designed as an actual tournament deck, a 60-card 4-of deck, to combat high tide decks and strategies. Basically, that was during a time in which there was basically a three deck meta. There was more than that, but there was basically high tide, which was exceedingly strong. And there was Sly, or Red Deck Wins, as it was called, Sly at the time. And then there was Suicide Black. Basically, the 3-deck meta went this way. The Red Deck was actually slower than the Suicide deck. And actually tended to lose to High Tide. High Tide lost to Suicide Black because it was faster than High Tide was. And therefore, so it was basically a three-deck meta. And SUI kind of came to prominence in that metagame because it was very good against what was considered widely the best deck, which was High Tide at the time. Times Royal High Tide was very, very strong. So what I want to do is actually kind of recreate the spirit of that deck in the deck that you have in front of you. So I know there's been some big black decks that have been kind of showcased that run like Lake of the Dead, Grave Titans, stuff like that. This deck is not doing that. This deck is going as low to the ground as it possibly can, and I don't think I've made it all the way as far down as I want to make it yet, as far as, getting as low as I possibly can. Typically speaking, the reason it's called Suicide as well is because, while you're going very low, you're kind of playing some cards that are questionable, because black cards tend to come with a cost, even if they are powerful. The deck wins rapidly and tends to damage itself in the process. The reason this deck will tend to damage itself so much is because it uses the most efficient removal available in the game, to include cards like Slaughter Pact, Snuff Out, Dismember, Fatal Push. These are all basically as cheap or cheaper than Swords to Plowshares. Now, they're not quite as good as Swords to Plowshares, but I don't even know if you could play Swords to Plowshares in this deck if you would. However, you may run a card like, Vendetta over here. And let me pull up the display window real fast. So you kind of have that going on that actually attacks your own life total while you're trying to get after effects for very efficient rates. And then you have all the Bobs. So this deck has quite a few Bobs in it, and there's a few cards that are not Bobs in here, but you have Rune Raider, you have Painseer, which I'm a little on the fence about right now, but still does Dark Confidant work. Glint Sleeve Siphoner, newer printing, and actually I like this card quite a bit. This card's been very, very strong for me. Dark Confidant, no real replacement. Glint Sleeve Siphoner comes close. Blood Scrivenger. Now, this is probably a weirdo card that you haven't seen before, or if you have seen it, it's been a while, probably since Draft. This card right here basically only draws you cards once you're hellbent. Because we're playing a 27 land, 54 creature deck with basically a combined converted mana cost of probably about 1.1 or 1.2. It's very easy for us to get hellbent. Our points are also invested in in Black Lotus and Mox Jet. So the potential for really fast starts is it's there. It's decently. It's not really high, but it's decent. You also have Dark Ritual in the deck as well. So you're looking to dump your hand as rapidly as you can. All of these effects, like when you look at Blood Scrivenger and then Asylum Visitor above it, which is a very similar effect, it says if any player has, or if at the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no card stand, you draw a card, and you lose 1 life. So this can happen on your opponent's turn as well. Basically, these cards just complement kind of the strategy well, because you're going to be dumping your hand relatively quickly, and once your hand's dumped, you want to be able to re-up relatively fast, because your cards are not singularly that great. They're just intended to basically be kind of like suspended or slower burn spells to knock your opponent out. And then we have Crypt Breaker up here and Smuggler's Copter. These are not Bobs. They're honorary mentions as Bobs. Crypt Breaker eventually can make cards by making enough zombies and then tapping the zombies plus the Crypt Breaker to draw cards. And Smuggler's Copter just gets you what's relevant. If you don't need a land that's in your hand, or you don't need a late game Mox, you go ahead and pitch it with Smuggler's Copter, find a threat, get after them. So that's all kind of going on. Then we also have some threats that just damage ourselves, like, Spawn of Mayhem, this is going to damage us. You have, Master of the Feast. It damages you in a different way. This is just a huge card. Just a big guy for 3, but it draws your opponent a card on each of your upkeeps. You have Herald of Torment that does damage to you every turn. Plague Belcher eats one of your smaller dudes, but generally you're going to have cards that have Recursion, which is kind of in this pile right here. These are all the recursive cards. Basically, you are in a lot of ways eschewing standard notions of card advantage and converting them into tempo. But, with that said, you also have the latent potential to get some card engines online at the cost of your own life total, and you also have recursion engines, so against mid-range and or control, you tend to have a more viable plan to kind of go long because you're able to just get free cards back. Now, the quality of those cards may not be exceedingly high, but the aggregate power of them is significant, so the cards all kind of just support this strategy of either getting them dead really quick, or if you run into a bind and you can't quite get them dead, getting your cards back so you can continue to basically force them to face off against a pretty wide range of threats, a lot of which have evasion, whether it be flying, shadow, menace, just straight up unblockable. There's quite a few threats that are very, very difficult to block in the deck. But as you can see, we have a lot of threats that do damage to ourselves, whether that be giving our opponents cards, whether that be getting cards and doing damage via the converted mana cost of the cards, or just directly dealing damage to us every upkeep. We even have Reaver Drone in here. That's why the deck gets its name Suicide Black, because Black's aggressive cards tend to come at a cost. And that kind of started off with cards like Carnophage, which is still in this deck, and Sarcomancy. Unfortunately, the original deck, which played Hatred, and if you're not familiar with that card, I will pull it up momentarily. Hatred is a very cool card, one of my old favorites. This card is basically Fireball for a creature. It's 5 mana. You would cast this with Dark Ritual back when the deck was a 60-card deck. 60-card 4 of. As an additional cost to cast a spell, pay X life. Target creature gets +X/+0 until end of turn. So basically it's Howl from Beyond with Channel stapled to it. And this could kill an opponent outright if you're playing against a blue deck. Now against red decks, typically speaking, this was kind of a dicey play. You often sideboarded these out and brought in Masticores or Curse Scrolls, etc., to try to combat them. But this guy's is the deck. I'm going to go through it by curve now and kind of show the threat package that we've got, and then some of the different subcategories that I have over here for how I've kind of organized the deck. As you can see, it's a 27 land deck. 2 of our lands are hiding over here in the 2-drop pile. You may ask why. Well, it's Mishra's Factory and Mutavault. These essentially act as finishers, and or if you get Wrath of Godded and for some reason you don't have recursive creatures, you can just fire these things up. But they do essentially operate as 2-drops in the deck. You typically speaking only need to hit with them once, maybe twice. But oftentimes this deck is fast enough that even if they're able to Wrath you, the game's still pretty much over because they're in such a low life total and you have enough of these guys kind of around that they're basically in a position where they can never tap their mana to actually do something relevant. But as you go into the actual mana base itself, we are running all the fetch lands. The reason we have fetch lands is because of cards that care about Delve, to include Tasigur. I used to actually be running can't think of it right now. The 5/5 Flying Demon with Delve and Gurmag Angler. I actually cut those two because I oftentimes found that they were really dead cards in my openers. And oftentimes I was winning the game by turn 4 or 5, and I didn't even get to a point where I could really cast them effectively, or I had just enough gas that it wasn't necessary to cast them. So oftentimes, if I'm finding I'm not casting a card, I'm just going to cut it and bring in something that's a little more efficient, or bring something that kind of diversifies what the deck's capabilities are. But I did leave Tasigur, and you may ask why. Well, Tasigur is 1 mana or 1 Delve cheaper than Gurmag Angler, which was actually what it took. I was just like, I want the cheapest possible one. I'm losing out on power because of that, but mana is actually more of a faucet in this deck than having cards are. That's kind of evinced by the fact that we're running 27, so you should, generally speaking, be drawing gas after your opening 7. So we are running the fetches. At one point I was running Lake of the Dead and Phyrexian Tower. As the deck got lower and lower on the curve, I cut those cards because I found that Lake of the Dead is realistically only useful on turn 3. In turn 3, you're basically sacrificing all of your lands. And that's going to give you a grand total of 6 mana on that turn, on turn 3, if you don't have some other form of acceleration like Black Lotus, Mox, or Dark Ritual. And I realistically didn't need that much mana by that turn. I already pretty much had my hand developed. So while I think Lake of the Dead is very powerful, I oftentimes found it was kind of a dead opening card, and that was actually my 28th land. I actually cut that land card to go down to 27. Just because I thought it would be more relevant to actually have a draw that was not just, mana acceleration. Now that said, I may go back to it. The problem is this deck really cares about its early development, and if you like have a bunch of opening hands that just have Lake of the Dead, and no other land, like it's pretty bad. And you realistically need 3 lands to make Lake of the Dead work for any given hand. And on 27 lands, your likelihood of seeing 3 lands is happening probably around the 10th card drawn, to include your opening 7 plus 3. But 10th or 11th card is generally where you're going to see it, and by that point in time, you've already had a couple draw steps, and the likelihood of you getting it is there. It's it's probabilistically it should happen, but oftentimes I find that you tend to peter off on 2 to 3 lands, 2 lands pretty early, and then third land probably by turn 4 or 5. What tends to be what happens in the games I play out. So, bunch of swamps. Tomb of Arami. So this card is pretty cool, and I've actually used to kill a few folks. This is basically a swamp that taps for black, does you damage. You can also sacrifice this thing, tap this thing, plus 4 mana, 2 black, 2. Sacrifice it and put a legendary 5/5 black demon spirit creature with flying named Arami onto the battlefield. This card's actually been pretty good for me. I've often found that, if I do end up flooding out a little bit, this card becomes more relevant, and the life loss isn't that bad. And it even synergizes to some degree with cards like Death Shadow, which we are running in this deck, and actually this won me a game against Red Deck wins. Alright, for the rest of the mana, we do have Dark Ritual in the deck. I took this out for a bit because I felt like it was too kind of, how do I put it? Too kind of cliche with the deck. But then I found mana was a really bad choke in the deck, and I was like, my best draws tend to be my Dark Ritual draws. And because I'm running so few lands, I'll continue to draw creatures. If I have the 2 lands to start off with and a Dark Ritual, I'll draw more lands eventually, but I should be able to cast a preponderance of the deck just on 2 mana alone. But the early acceleration on turn 1 just to get a 2-drop or 3 1-drops or a 2-drop 1-drop down or 2-drop discard spell. Or even just, a 3-drop. I think I've dropped an Ammon Eternal a couple times on turn 1. I've actually dropped a Spawn of Mayhem off of Black Lotus on turn 1. And it was all pretty good. Definitely won those games. Black Lotus, yep. Like I said, the Ritual turns, or the Ritual turn 1s, tend to be some of our best turns. Our best draws. Black Lotus also a component for some of our best draws. I mean, our best draws probably have Black Lotus Dark Ritual in them. And we just jump the whole hand on turn 1. Chrome Mox, yeah, because we're playing so few lands and so many black cards, Chrome Mox tends to work out pretty well in this deck. And oftentimes, you have a redundant card or a card like a 1-drop that you're probably not going to be able to cast until turn 4 based on sequencing out your turns and probability of draw of lands. So oftentimes, you can throw a 1-drop under here and just be fine with losing it because you're not going to have really time to cast it when it's going to be relevant anyways. Mox Jet, yep. It's free mana, so why not? Alright, so going into the threat package here, so you have the first guy up, Carnophage here, and probably first in my heart. This card kind of put SUI on the map, or helped put SUI on the map. It was kind of the baseline turn 1 play if you didn't have a Dark Ritual start, but typically speaking, you played a Carnophage on turn 1. Turn 2, there's a possible kill with double Dark Ritual into Hatred, but Carnophage is kind of where the rubber met the road, and this guy punches hard. 1 mana for 2/2. He hasn't aged that well. I mean, nowadays, you generally expect, a 1 mana 2/2 to just be a 1 mana 2/2. But gotta remember, we're not playing white here, so our creatures are not going to be quite as strong, or they're going to have some drawbacks to them. That said, Carnophage still does a pretty good job. I mean, I cannot complain about this card. He's done good work so far since I've had him in the deck. And of note, he's a zombie, which means that he actually does kind of combine pretty well with some other zombie sub-themes that we have going on, to include Gravecrawler, which comes back. We also have, not Mogis' Marauder, where you have Plague Belcher, which if you sacrifice a Carnophage, not sacrifice, but put 2 -1/-1 counters on Carnophage, and kill him, then your opponent loses 1 life, which is also kind of cool. Carrion Feeder, this card's really good. It doesn't look like it'd be anything special in the deck, but actually this thing grows pretty quickly. 1, it blanks removal, unless the removal is aimed directly at it, and removal going at it's kind of fine. It's almost like it's acting like a Mother of Runes or Benevolent Bodyguard for a turn, if the removal has to go with this as opposed to something more relevant. Also, this thing does have a combo as well with Gravecrawler. Basically, for each swamp you have or each black mana you're able to produce, you can put a +1/+1 counter on this thing and eventually just bring the Gravecrawler back. Also, with recursive creatures, sometimes you can find yourself in positions where you can return them over and over and over again, and get this thing quite large. There's no infinite loops with it, but I mean it can get up to a 5 or 6 or 7/7. I've seen it happen in the deck a couple times. That's a pretty large creature. Punches pretty hard. Death Shadow, this deck does not put up its dukes very well to defend itself. It puts up its dukes to smash the opponent in the face. So, that said, against red deck wins, against white decks, you're going to take a beating. This deck generally tends to end games at a fairly low life total, because it has pretty blatant disregard for its own life total, and it doesn't really have the best of blockers. A lot of its stuff comes into play tapped, or just can't block. So that's a tougher time with that. We have to use the creature kill to kind of keep ourselves alive, and or remove relevant blockers, which tends to be more important. But Death Shadow gets really big, really fast in this deck. Diregraph Ghoul, yep, just a 2-mana or 1-mana 2/2. Comes into play tap, but doesn't matter. Card is just fine. Gnarled Scarhide. I actually have used the bestow capability on this. Sometimes it kind of acts like a haste creature when you get to do that. Given, casting for 4 mana to cast a haste creature is not that good. Basically this is either a 2/1 when you want it to be, or it's Unholy Strength for 4 mana when you really need to get damage in time now. And the cool thing is, it's better than Unholy Strength, right? Because if the creature that it's on dies, then this thing sticks around after it's dead. So this card's pretty good. Although I think they really did screw up the subtypes or the super types. I don't know if it's subtypes or super types of this card. It should be a Minotaur zombie. For some reason, this is just a Minotaur. But what are you gonna do? Also, this thing cannot block, so keep that in mind. As I'm going through, a lot of these creatures just cannot block. Diregraph comes into play tapped. Carrion Feeder, yep, that guy doesn't block. Gnarled Scarhide, nope, does not block. Next one up, Grasping, Scoundrel. This card is on the lower end of our 1-drops. It is a 1-mana 1/1, but when it attacks, it becomes a 2/1. Since, like I said, we're not really intending on blocking all that much, unless we're in a really bad spot. This card's just fine. It's a 2/1 for 1, and actually this guy can block, which is better than not being able to, I suppose. Mardu Shadow Spear. This card's pretty cool. So it's a 1/1, but when it attacks, each opponent loses a life. So basically, it attacks as a 2/1 as well. It also has dash, so this thing does have haste potential to kind of basically act as a shock for 2 mana, which is not great, but it's actually better than it looks in some ways. Also, life loss is not irrelevant because there's a lot of cards that actually are 1/2s or 1/1s that actually deal life loss when they just attack. Oftentimes these cards will not be blocked as often because there's a lot of better threats to actually block in the deck, and they'll end up chipping in for a lot of damage. Additionally, part of the damage this thing does with a life loss that these kind of cards do is not preventable. It can't be blocked down, I guess is what I mean. And the fact that it can't be blocked is actually generally quite relevant. Alright, so Night Market Lookout. This guy is actually kind of interesting. This guy also synergizes well with our equipment that we have, our vehicle that we have in the deck. Night Market Lookout, basically, whenever it becomes tapped, each opponent loses a life, you gain a life. It is a 1/1 as well, so it kind of acts similar to Shadow Spear. But the cool thing about this is whenever it becomes tapped. So Smuggler's Copter actually synergizes quite well with it. You can just tap this thing, dome them for 1, drain them for 1, and then hit them for 3. Kind of the similar thing with Painseer. Painseer has Inspired. So the turn Painseer comes in, typically speaking, it would not be tapped on the following upkeep, following untap. So you're not going to get to draw a card off of it on upkeep. That said, if you do play it and you have a Smuggler's Copter in play, you can just tap it right away, and then on the next turn you already draw a card, which is kind of a cool little inner synergy of the cards in the deck. Reaver Drone. Alright, this guy's a SUI card. This guy is basically like a slightly worse Carnivage. Almost always you're taking damage off this thing. It says at the beginning of upkeep, if you lose 1 life, unless you control another colorless creature. So there are actually quite a few colorless creatures. Sometimes I'll activate Manlands if the life total is really important, and I know I'm going to attack with them. You have Porcelain Legionnaire. Actually, I'm sorry, this guy is not colorless, is he? It's colorless, so these two don't count. Phyrexian Revoker does count, and Bearer of Silence actually counts as well. And I'm trying to think if there's more. Yet there's a Scrap Heap Scrounger as well. So those are the colorless creature cards that I have in the deck. There are no others. So oftentimes you're just taking 1 to turn off it. Sarcomancy. This is an original Suicide Black card as well. 1 mana enchantment puts 2/2 black zombie into our creature token into play when Sarcomancy enters the battlefield. If there are no zombies on the battlefield, then Sarcomancy deals 1 damage to you during upkeep. Or during the beginning of your upkeep. So this card, can be kind of a double-edged sword, but a lot of these cards, like I said, are double-edged swords. But it's a 2/2 for 1 mana, which in black is hard to come by. Shadowling Denizen. This card does not look like much looking at. It is a 1-mana 1/1. But whenever a black creature enters the battlefield, and keep in mind we have 54 creatures. Now, not all of them are black. There are a few artifact creatures, and there's a few devoid creatures. But whenever a black creature enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gains Intimidate until end of turn, which means basically you can pass a bunch of damage that's unblockable unless your opponent's playing artifact creatures and or black creatures, which tends to be pretty good against the mid-range decks because you just start passing damage through with your biggest dude and then chumping with your crappy guys that have already kind of done their job until you get them dead. And evasion tends to be really important. In the 1 spot, you're not going to see as much evasion, but as we get to the 2 and the 3 spot, evasion becomes a lot more important. Tormented Hero, yep, this guy is just a 2/1. The heroic component of him has never come up in this deck. I suppose it could with the Gnarled Scarhide, but otherwise, Gnarled Scarhide and Herald of Torment. Because those are technically enchantments, so you could enchant Tormented Hero and cause your opponent to lose a life and gain a life. But I have never done that. Alright, Vampire Lacerator. Yep, this guy damages you unless your opponent has 10 or less life, and he's 2/2 for 1. That's pretty much the relevant part of him. Vicious Conquistador, basically a 2/2 for 1 as well, except for it is a 1/2. Whenever it attacks, each opponent loses a life. Rakdos Cackler, yep, this is a hybrid black-red or Rakdos card. 2/2, basically, well, if you unleash it, it's a 2/2. Typically speaking, I don't think I've ever not unleashed it, but it cannot block when it's unleashed. Deathrite Shaman, yeah, pretty ubiquitous black-green creature. The fetch lands are also in the deck for this fellow right here. Additionally, this card is basically a 2/2. You know, you can basically get rid of relevant cards of their graveyard. The one downside to this card is you're not going to be ever activating it for green. Although it's not the most relevant of the abilities on here, it's probably the least relevant unless you're playing against Reanimator. Playing against Reanimator, we assume some pretty significant risk with this card. Bone Splitter. Basically a 2-mana, 2-power attacker, haste attacker. And it is modal, so it can go to multiple different creatures, and as you get evasive creatures, generally speaking, your evasive creatures are going to carry your Bone Splitters for you. Tasigur, intended to be a 1-drop or 2-drop in this deck. Typically speaking, he is. You cannot activate the activated ability on this. It is simply a 4/5, 4/1. That's kind of the intent behind it. Bearer of Silence. There are ways to activate this thing, so if you're not familiar with this card, I was not until I started kind of reworking this deck and doing a lot of research on aggressive black cards. This is a devoid card again, so it's colorless technically, but it has a black 1 casting cost. When you cast a spell, you may pay colorless widget and 1. If you do, target opponent sacrifices a creature. I've never actually had that come up. The biggest thing is, it's a 2/1 flyer that, well, it's a 2/1 flyer, is what it is, basically. And it has the random capability to have some upside if you happen to have Mutavault or Mishra's Factory in play. Bitter Blossom. This card is a house, and I probably should get the Rebecca Guay art, or Rebecca Gay art, yeah. Basically just houses control. At the beginning of upkeep, you lose a life, and create a 1/1 Flying Man. Black Fairy Rogue. This card, you know, over 3 to 4 turns, generally just wins games. It can also act as a force field if need be. You know, these fairies are really good at carrying equipment, whether it be like Grafted War Gear or Bone Splitter. Just tends to be really, really solid. Now, that said, this is a better card against like more controlling and mid-range decks. Against combo, you tend not to want this card because it tends to be a little bit slow. So your fastest draws are not going to include Bitter Blossom, but Bitter Blossom is a great value card that I think definitely earns its keep in the deck. Doughty Whore. I'm on the lower end of creatures that I'm running in the deck. Basically, the biggest reason I'm playing this guy, though, is because he has Shadow. This card's unblockable. Basically unblockable, except maybe against some white decks that are running like Soltari Priest or Soltari Monk. Actually, no, never mind. They can't even block him because he can't be blocked by white creatures. So this guy's basically unblockable. I don't think anyone runs anything but white Shadow creatures, and that's really rare as well. But basically 2/1 unblockable guy. Una's Prowler. Biggest thing's the stat line on this card. Stat line and flying. So evasion plus 3/1. You assume some risk of getting its Reanimator with this because folks can discard their cards and make this thing smaller. And if they're discarding like Crystal Brands, pardon me, definitely not good for you. Pack Rat. Yeah. Oftentimes this card is actually a little slower than actually just playing the deck out. But, if your opponent managed to deal with your early threats, or you managed to get one pack rat out, generally speaking, one additional pack rat, besides the first one, generally speaking, the game just ends, unless they're a Wrath of God deck. But this thing just gets out of hand really fast. If you play with it limited, you know that it basically won every limited game that it was ever opened in, or it was ever played in, and not removed immediately. And it dominated that standard format. All right, up next you have Doughty Slayer. This guy's a two toughness guy. Basically pretty similar to Doughty Whore. It's a 2/2 shadow, but it must attack each combat if able. The 2 toughness is kind of relevant because like Fire Ice, Firebolt. I'm sorry, not Firebolt. It's Firebolt. I'm sorry, not Firebolt. Forked Bolt. Forked Bolt. There we go. Not Firebolt. That's not even played anymore. Forked Bolt, Fire Ice, Electrolyze, all kind of template badly against the 1 toughness things. So I tend to find I like this guy a little bit better. Gifted Aetherborn. This card just has a great stat line. It's basically, I think folks call him the new Nighthawk or new Hawk. I don't know, but this guy's quite good. For 2 mana, 2/3 lifelinking Death Toucher is a pretty good deal. This thing generally trades up. Folks don't generally want to block it, and if they do, they're generally losing something, and you're getting a little bit of life. Helps race. It's just all around a good card. Nantuko Shade, this card is great. So the one downside to it is, generally speaking, you want to cast it a little bit later, so you have some the ability to pump it out of burn range. But if this thing gets to attack, it is a fireball every single turn for black mana, which is good. Graveyard Marshal, I actually consider putting this over in the card advantage pile because this guy kind of is card advantage. You lose creatures like your Night Market Lookouts, your Grasping Scoundrels, and if you don't have much better to do, it's just good to have a mana sink in aggressive decks. This is already a pretty good stat line. It's a 3/2 for 2 mana, which is pretty solid. But the fact that it actually has a mana sink on it that allows you to turn expend cards into new creatures is really big by getting these 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Vampire Hexmage, just a decent stat line. It's 2/1, which is fine. It's not, if it was just a 2/1, I wouldn't pay 2 mana for it. But the fact that it first strikes is pretty good. Also, you can sacrifice to remove all counters from target permanent. This can be relevant in certain matchups. Definitely gets Planeswalkers. I've used it to actually remove counters that were put on by Plague Belcher in this deck. I think I used to remove some counters on some weird Merfolk card that put counters on itself whenever Merfolk was cast. Just all around a pretty decent card. It has some weird applications that I'm probably not even thinking of right now where it can actually be useful. It's good against +1/+1 counters. It kills a Walking Ballista immediately. Although, if folks are casting a Walking Ballista fairly, you're probably fine with that. Generally speaking, folks do not cast Walking Ballista in a fair way. Phyrexian Revoker. So this card's really sweet. It's played in vintage stacks or vintage workshops. Played in Legacy Death and Taxes, played in Canadian Highlander Death and Taxes. This card just does a lot. I think this is a card that definitely scales well with experience, especially in Canadian Highlander where you're playing Singleton. And you really have to know your opponent's decks and your opponent's strategies pretty well to understand what lines they're taking and what you need to be able to stop without actually having seen it. And I think oftentimes if you play enough of this game, you can get to a point where it becomes almost second nature. But it's, the power of Phyrexian Revoker I do not think can be understated. This card just smashes face. Whether you're stopping a Soul Ring, stopping a Black Lotus on the Storm deck, I don't know, Belcher I guess could be a thing. Time Vault, Voltaic Key, Sensei's Divining Top, you name it. This thing just stops a lot of stuff. Spinethopter. Yep, just a dude, guys. Just a dude. This is a 2 mana 2/1. Yeah, you're not paying the Phyrexian mana ever. I don't think you can pay it in this deck. I guess technically you could pay this mana cost with the Black Lotus. That would be the only way, though. But this is a 2/1 flyer. It has evasion, so it was good enough. Porcelain Legionnaire. Yep, this is also just a 2 mana 3/1 first striker, which is a huge stat line. Technically a white card, but I remember I forgot about putting these guys in there. I eventually came back and was like, what good artifact creatures could I put in here? And I remember these two were available. And you have Factory Mutavault, just my 2-man lands. Alright, so going into the 3-drop spot, you have Ammon Eternal. This thing can be shrunk pretty fast by opposing spells. But if you're playing against control, and this thing's able to get one hit in, generally speaking, you're going to be put into a pretty good spot. And if you only get one hit in, plus get it blocked, and then have it die, and basically dome them for 3 damage off of the Afflict, this is still really good. Just 3 mana for a 5/5 is a big game in my opinion, and I've been pretty happy with Ammon Eternal every time I've cast it. All right, Plague Belcher. This thing is also just a beast. 3 mana for a 5/4 menace is already big, and the fact that a lot of your cards just don't scale up well, they kind of like do their thing and then they become irrelevant. Means you can just pitch them in the trash when you're done with them and just use Plague Belcher. On the same token, like I said, you're going to have a bunch of cards that just aren't relevant into the long game, and you can cast a Mogi's Marauder and just send them through, because Mogi's Marauder gives everything evasion and haste. So basically, it just smashes face. Drana, Liberator of Malachor. This thing is nuts. So this thing does have First Strike. It's not very common that you see a lot of black cards that do have First Strike. I guess excepting the Knights, and that's one thing we'll talk about. I did not include the Knight cycle in this, and the Knight cycle is Black Knight, the Pump Knights, Hand of Cruelty. I think there's a new Knight from Dominaria. Basically, all of the 2-power First Strike, Protection from White or Hexproof from White, 2 black mana creatures, or black and 1 now, I think, is the Dominaria one. But historically, they've been 2 black. I did not include any of those cards because they just kind of have a low synergy, and they don't punch as hard as some of these other cards that I think I put in here. And they're not really that evasive. They just have First Strike and they can't evade, so they just get blocked by bigger stuff. But the reason that First Strike's relevant on Drana is because the way Drana works is, so you attack with her, and whenever Drana, Liberator of Malachor, deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature you control. Because she has First Strike, that means all of your non-First Striking creatures will actually do their standard damage +1 damage, because they get the counter before the damage is actually resolved in the damage step. So First Strike damage happens, then the +1/+1 counters go, and then the rest of damage goes. So Drana tends to be very, very powerful in this deck, because we are a 54 creature deck. She's going to tend to be your curve topper for the given hand you have, and once she hits once, they're either dead or they're in a position where they're not going to come back. Herald of Torment. There's some random upside to enchanting a creature with this or bestowing a creature with this. But at the end of the day, this is just a 3/3 flyer. You lose a life at the beginning of your upkeep, but it's not all that bad. I mean, it's not a ton of life. And this is SUI Black, so I kind of felt it was on theme. And I also think that the bestow cost is actually really powerful as well. I've yet to do it, but I have had one opportunity to do it, but I just didn't. I had a better play, I think. But the card is pretty good. I mean, it's not, I feel like nowadays it's probably a 4/3, but I think a 3/3 that has the upside of possibly being an enchantment and also just, does kind of what the deck wants to do, just makes a flyer, is pretty good. Lightbane Zombie. I'm playing this really for the body, the evasion and the intimidate and the 3/1 body. The other part of it is Lightbane Zombie randomly can just be great against certain decks. If you want to get an Obstinate Baloth out of someone's hand and you don't want to discard it. A Primeval Titan, a Thrag Tusk, you name it. This card can just get rid of all the green and white cards you could ever hope for. Master of the Feast. So this dude is a big lad, literally. So 3 mana, 5/5 flyer, which is a pretty amazing stat line for a card, but it has a pretty massive downside. Since the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent draws a card. So ostensibly, you want to cast this card the turn prior to the turn you intend on winning. So you cast this guy, force them to react to the board. If they don't react to the boards, they draw the card on your upkeep, smash their face and kill them. That's all you want to do with them. You don't really want to have them sticking around for more than one turn. But because they draw on your upkeep, typically speaking, unless they have Settle the Wreckage or Comeuppance, there's not a lot of instant speed wraths. Now, oftentimes what will happen is opponents will remove this card during your upkeep after they get to draw a card, which stinks. But I mean, they got a free card off of it. They had to spend a card to deal with it. They basically spent their turn waiting around, not developing, and you kind of get to try again. Geralf's Messenger. This is a very powerful card and realistically only playable in this style of deck. 3 black mana is a hefty casting cost for this card. Enters the battlefield tapped, 3/2 for 3. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 2 life, and it has Undying, so it comes back. It's at least going to generally do 4 damage, and it's a 3/2 initially, and then a 4/3, which is a pretty big game. Grafted War Gear. I haven't played with this card in forever until I started trying to just tune this deck up, and this card punches like a behemoth. I'm not going to sing its praises because I think everyone else knew this card was great. I just haven't played it in forever, and it is amazing. Spawn of Mayhem. Someone was asking me how good this card is. It's got the Predator face going on. This card is stellar. I've been very, very happy with this card. It races really well. Both players are going to be losing life, but whenever you get below 10, this thing just gets bigger and bigger each time, and it smacks hard. Plus, it has Flample, has Flying Trample, which is pretty amazing. It means it can beat through most things that are going to be in the air during the same time frame that it's going to be in the air. Alright guys, jump into these last piles. This is my recursive creature pile. Bloodghast, I think everyone knows it, loves it. It's a dredge staple. Comes back whenever you play a land. Pretty amazing card. Relentless Dead, a Menace creature, 2/2 for 2. Whenever it dies, you may pay a black. If you do, return it to its owner's hand. And then go ahead and recast it. And when it dies, you can also pay X. If you do, return another zombie creature card with converted mana cost X from your graveyard to the battlefield. So you can return actual zombie dudes from the graveyard to the battlefield with this card if you have a large enough amount of mana, which is kind of cool to have an additional mana sink in the deck. Scrap Heap Scrounger, yep, this guy comes back. 3/2, doesn't block, don't care. Smash his face, pretty good. Despoiler of Souls, I've always wanted to play this card, and this is the first deck I've actually had that actually does get to play it. I don't think it really had a deck during the time frame that it was out, but this card is pretty good. 3/1 for 2 is a pretty decent body. It's not blocking, but we don't really care. We don't want it to block. You can also just bring this thing back. So exile 2 other creature cards from your graveyard, return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. Pretty great stat line, pretty good ability. Also you can do this on their turn, so like they don't know, if you're going to use your mana to do that or do something else. It definitely has some tricksiness to it. Same with Scrappy. All right, so the Gravecrawler. This card has a couple combos in the deck. There are other zombies in this deck, so it's not very hard to get this guy kind of doing the recursive loop. And it's a 1 mana 2/1, which is pretty strong. Bloodsoaked Champion, possibly even stronger than Gravecrawler, just due to the fact that this deck's always going to generally be attacking. So, that's a little bit easier to trigger raid than it is to have a zombie in play in this deck. Gutterbones, this guy's recursion ability is strong, but you're returning him to your hand, so this is really a 3 mana commitment to get this card back, and your opponent has to have lost life this turn. So there is that. Then Dread Wanderer, you basically have to have no hand left, and you pay 3 mana to return it to the battlefield. Neither of these are really as strong as Gravecrawler. Gravecrawler in the right deck is probably better than Bloodsoaked Champion, but I think Bloodsoaked Champion in general is probably the best in this deck. But these are all my recursive guys. They're things that I am able to sack to stuff like Plague Belcher. They're also things that can get Wrath of Godded, and I don't really care all that much because I'll just buy them back eventually. Or immediately in the case of Relentless Dead, Scrap Heap Scrounger, and Despoiler. So that's probably my card engines. I kind of already talked my card engines, guys, so I'm not going to go over them exhaustively again. We have Wasteland over here as my 27th land, so really 26 mana producers. 29 mana producers and 1 Wasteland, which you can use for mana, but typically speaking, it's just going to dome a land right away to buy some tempo. Next up, you have the removal and the discard suite, and some of these cards overlap, so I'm going to go over them real quick. Dismember, really cheap, kills almost everything. Collective Brutality can kill quite a bit. Also gets rid of instants and sorceries, and can't just dome your opponent. I actually find I dome my opponent quite a bit in this deck because the 2 damage can be really relevant for ending a turn cycle sooner. Fatal Push, just cheap removal. Slaughter Pact, cheap removal. Oftentimes, the best way to be using this thing is to use it the turn that you're going to win because you don't ever intend on paying it. Snuff Out, very cheap as well. Just cost you 4 life. That's it. Liliana the Veil, removal and or discard right here. Same with Collective Brutality. Liliana the Veil, she doesn't tend to be a part of my faster draws, or my fastest draws, but she is a very steady value engine, especially with this many recursive creatures, and she does win quite a few games. And you still want removal and you want discard in this deck. You need some disruption, right? Alright, so discard. We have Kitesail Freebooter, which is just a great, relatively new card from Ixalan that's been printed. Gets a non-creature, non-land card out of their hand for as long as it stays in play, and it has evasion, which is kind of the selling point. I'm not playing Mesmeric Fiend, Ravenous Rats, or Brain Maggot in this deck. I'm just playing the Kitesail Freebooter. Mardu Skull Hunter. I kind of like this guy. So this guy, is interesting. He's a 2 mana 2/1, but when he comes into play, he enters the battlefield tapped, like pretty much half my creatures do. He has Raid, so when he enters the battlefield, if you attack with a creature this turn, your target opponent discards a card. So basically, he's kind of like a Silver Gill Adept, right? No. But he's good. Thoughtseize, yep. Just great. Duress, yep, great. Inquisition, yep, great. Hymn to Turek, yep. Get 2 cards, 2 for 1 for 2 mana, sounds good. Alright, guys, I'm not going to talk about the maybe board right now. I'm going to actually go on a quick pause, and we will jump into some gameplay with this deck. So I don't misrepresent the deck before I jump into the gameplay. I kind of think of this deck as like a 30-70 deck, and what I mean by that is like it has really strong matchups against some decks and really bad matchups against others. Now, that doesn't mean you can't win the 30% matchups, and they're probably not 30%. It's probably more like 40-60 or something like that. Or 35-65. I don't know, but it's a deck that does not always have game against everything. Like you can play some games, just be like, I can't possibly win this. That's going to happen because you're playing a very, very aggressive deck. So if you're playing against a deck that just stymies this sort of thing, like is playing like Curse of Death's Hold, or what is it, All Knight's Betrayal, or Night of All's Betrayal, or something like that, whatever that card is, the 4-mana legendary enchantment that gives every creature -1/-1. There are some cards and some decks that are just going to hose you, right? But in general, like this deck is not. There's not going to have you're going to be generally play a game with it, But there are going to be some decks where you just run them over. Like I think against like High Tide and blue decks, this deck is just stellar because they're not going to pressure your life total. You have a bunch of card engines and recursive creatures. 16 cards are either card engines or recursive creatures, and you're just very efficient. So like their counter magic's going to be just as much or more mana than the cards that they're going to be countering, which is generally not where blue wants to be. So you put them in that position, and generally speaking, they're not going to do so well. That said, you go against red deck wins or like White Weenie, and like their creatures are just better. They can do just as much or more damage than you can, or than you're able to. They probably have more burn, which means they're faster. The one upside you have against both is that you have more card engines. But unfortunately, your card engines aren't creatures, and in order for your creatures to actually work, you need to have an open board, and their creatures are just better. So, like, I think against white and red, this deck will tend to struggle generally because it's just slower, and the medium through which it does damage is just a weaker medium than either of those decks. How do you make up for that? Well, by having a massive volume of creatures, so you can just kind of flood the board rapidly and quickly with lower quality cards. And then card engines to continue to draw more lower quality cards to kind of flood them and basically just run them over. It's an overrun technique. It's kind of the strategy that's going on here. So anyways, guys, that all aside, I'm going to go to a quick pause and we'll get some gameplay coming up next. Alright guys, I am back. I'm going to leave the card reader up for this playthrough. So this is my opening hand in a Game 1 against Caracas. And this hand's pretty exciting. So it has a turn 1 Ammon Eternal, turn 2, either Silent Visitor or Mardu Skull Hunter to knock a card out of their hand. So let's see what happens. This is the Black Lotus draw. Probably not the strongest Black Lotus draw. That would probably include a Ritual or a Mox as well. Opponent, I don't know what happens here. They accidentally play out a Glacial Chasm and sack it. I go ahead and smack him in the face. Play on a Mardu Skull Hunter, knock a card out of their hand. Opponent plays a Scrub-a-Dub land here, Inquisitions me, gets my Silent Visitor, which makes sense. Bloodsoaked Champion having Recursion would not make much sense. Draw a 2-drop, so basically I've used my mana up every single turn here, and we have them under a lethal threat next turn. They just pass it and are dead on turn 4 here. Alright guys, quick pause and we'll be back momentarily for game number 2 in this match. Alright guys, back. And some of the games you're going to see are going to be kind of boring like that. If I have a Black Lotus start, like it's pretty tough for an opponent to beat that. I get Inquisition on turn 1, they take away the Liliana, which I don't know if I agree with. I actually think that I would have preferred taking away the Deathrite Shaman or the Tormented Hero. But at this point, I have no clue what they're on, other than they're probably on some sort of lands deck, like a Fast Bond lands deck. Probably, point spread's probably like Fast Bond, Strip Mine, Demonic Tutor, and some other stuff. Alright, so I kind of struggle in this game to find a land. I go ahead and just get down the Rakdos Cackler, put a +1/+1 counter on it, tap it to activate the Smuggler's Copter. Right now what I'm doing is looking for mana. I do not find it, but I'm able to get some value here. I discard my Scrap Heap Scrounger, and later on down the road, Scrap Heap Scrounger will get to come back. They play on a Liliana, the Last Hope, and they do have a Mace of Ith, which they actually use Sylvan Scrying to find earlier so they can protect their Liliana. Play on a Painseer here, kind of a cool synergy. I get to tap the Painseer with the Smuggler's Copter. They're going to use the Maze of Ith on the Smuggler's Copter, and I hit the Liliana for 1 to keep it mana neutral. I now have a creature in the graveyard that I couldn't play into the Liliana regardless, so that I can bring back my Scrap Heap Scrounger when I have the mana available to do so. I go ahead and tap the Painseer again. Attack with the 2 creatures that have power, because my Rakdos Cackler has been targeted here. So they play out a Restoration Angel. I finally find my land. I go ahead and discard the Asylum Visitor, but I'm not going to cast it for the Madness cost because there's a Liliana in play. I do damage the... I get rid of a Fatal Push. Then I go ahead and damage the Restoration Angel. The reason I did the Thoughtseize first is I wanted to know if it was worth using all of the abilities on Collective Brutality there. I do play out the Grafted Warrior here. That may be a questionable play. It may have just been better to put another threat out. But this basically means that the Maze of Ith is always going to be targeting the Rakdos Cackler. And if it's not, by the time I do get my Drana down, then I'm going to be able to get past Drana damage through and actually kill them. Deathrite Shaman's kind of just doing its job throughout this game, just doming them for a little bit of damage each turn. I do go ahead and cast out a Gifted Aetherborn here. What I'm trying to do is save up all of my little cards. I haven't played the Despoiler or the Night Market Lookout yet because they'll just die pretty easily to Liliana. I believe I'm going to opt to bring back the Scrap Heap Scrounger this turn. I could be wrong. I could just damage them with Deathrite, but I think it's a Scrap Heap turn here. Oh, nope, I just damaged them. So unfortunately, I cannot target the Siege Rhino with Slaughter Pact. That is one of the cards that this deck cannot kill. It can kill with Dismember, but it cannot kill with most of its targeted removal. Get it with Fatal Push, too. I guess most of my targeted removal hits it. Just not Slaughter Pact, not Snuff Out. We're trying to block some of the cards here. So I do go ahead and just cast out the 1/1 army that I've been holding in my hand. Because at this point, they can remove one of them with Liliana, and that's it, and then the rest are going to get through. They do draw a Tireless Tracker, play land, get a clue token off it, try fetching the fetch land they left in play to get another clue, but I go ahead and remove it in response. Go ahead and pay for Slaughter Pact here. On my upkeep, draw into a Gravecrawler. And I believe attack them for lethal here. With the Deathrite, as well. It's going to be lethal. They turn back the Grafted War geared up Rakdos Cackler. And go to -5. And that is this first game that I'll be showing you. So this is SUI Black versus Abzan lands. Abzan mid-range lands. I think in a latter game I saw they had Strip Mine and DT in their deck, but in this game we did not get to see it. Not particularly strong draws for our opponent. We're kind of able to punish them. I don't know how good of a matchup this is going to be in general. I'm not sure if they're running Toxic Deluge and stuff like that, or if they may not have that card, and Damnation. I tend to think of the lands decks as being more controlling, but evidently the mid-range versions are very, very good right now. Get Rog Monster versions are quite good. But I think they're a little slower, so, unless they have a more controlling draw where they can actually, wrath the board, sometimes you can just steal a win because, we've actually seen almost 10 more cards than our opponent at this point in the game, just due to some of our card advantage cards, Smuggler's Copter, did a number. How else did we draw cards? Oh, Painseer. Painseer and Smuggler's Copter is what got us through so many cards. So we had to see a lot of cards, and because we're playing less lands, we're going to draw more gas, right? We're running 27, I think, talking to this opponent, Caracas. So he was on a 42-land deck, so it's definitely a deck where lands matter quite a bit. But pretty cool deck that my opponent's got here. I just think a little bit slow out of the gates, and probably not the best of draws. We're kind of able to get there with the SUI Black deck. Alright guys, quick pause to be back for the next game momentarily. Alrighty guys, I am back. And, playing SUI Black again. Ditch that first hand. Go into a 6-card hand here under London Mulligan Scry, or London Mulligan rules. I have a Dark Ritual here, so this is going to be a turn 1 Graveyard Marshal plus Tormented Hero, likely turn 2 Smuggler's Copter. Opponent is playing High Tide more than likely, is my assumption, because I played this opponent quite a bit, and, I see Island Wayfarer's Bauble, and I think High Tide. I get my Smuggler's Copter down, and smack them for 5. This is the Power Ritual. They play on a Back to Basics, not a card that I'm really scared of. I do get lucky and draw a 1-drop there. I actually could have opted to go for a Duress. I don't. I actually don't. Here, I get rid of Mogis Marauder. It's not likely that I'm going to draw Black Lotus. It's the only way I could possibly cast that card next turn. Go ahead and duress them here. I believe they repeal my Tormented Hero. I use the Tormented Hero to activate the Smuggler's Copter. They go ahead and cast Impulse, and then I believe promptly concede the game. Yep, this deck smacks fast. So, High Tide tends to be, I think, a better matchup for this deck than like Storm. And I'm going to show you a Storm game. So Storm and Doomsday, I think, is actually like really close to 50-50. I honestly think the matchup comes down a lot to die roll, depending on if you win the die roll or lose the die roll. But High Tide tends to be a turn slower than those decks, or more, because it's more controlling. It has counter spells and stuff like that, and counter spells tend to be really bad versus this deck. Because if I get a couple, if I get the Dark Ritual start, I already have 5 power on the board, I can win just with that. So you have to deal with that, and while you're dealing with that, your mana is to be tied up, and I'm just casting more nonsense, and then you got to deal with that. It's kind of like it's just how do you put it? It's kind of a trap, right? Like it's like you don't have enough mana to do it, unless you had like Black Lotuses every turn for land drops. But you don't, so eventually you just lose if you're trying to like play a board control plan on basically a mono blue deck. So get High Tide here, and on to Game 2 versus Tide, guys. Be back momentarily for that. Alrighty, guys, we are back. And opening hand is a Black Lotus Swamp. I think I apologize to my opponent, Engine Joe, here. These two hands were obscene. But you play the cards, you can draw them, right? So the right play here is to play out Porcelain Legionnaire and Pain Seer to get card engine plus Threat Online, plus it's 5 power, which is basically the same as Spawn of Mayhem. But I go for the sweet line and just play my only 4-drop in the deck on turn 1 because I just want to, right? I'm trying to get as much damage on my opponent as I possibly can, so I play out the Porcelain Legionnaire here. It could have made more sense to go for Pain Seer, but what the plan is here is if they play a thing in the ice, I'll Fatal Push it and play out Pain Seer, and if they don't do anything, I'll play out Pain Seer, assuming that it'll get countered, and then I will duress them after getting the Pain Seer countered. I end up taking the Time Twister here because I don't think their hand's that great. It's going to take time for them to set up. Basically what their hand contains that's relevant is a Dig Through Time. That's the only relevant card in their hand, in my opinion. Oh, I'm sorry, they have Repeal as well, but Repeal is no Time Twister, for sure. So they go ahead and repeal my dude here. I smack him for some damage, replay the card out here. They go ahead and I believe Dig Through Time here. Yep. And then I think promptly concede. Oh, maybe they don't. No, they don't. That's right. This game goes longer than this. So I try to cast a card here to see if I can get the 2 damage in off this thing. They end up Cryptic Commanding it and tapping my team, and I have to say go. Now I know at this point they have a Brain Geyser. They drew into an Impulse. They Brainstorm here. Cast a Cloud of Fae. I believe cast out a Peregrine Drake. No, they Mind's Desire, and that's when they hit the Peregrine's Drake. So they Mind's Desire, hit Peregrine Drake, Island to Island, Counterspell, I want to say. Alright, good. So far, so good. Untap their mana, down to 2 cards at this point, one of which we know, which is Brain Geyser, and they play out a Mystical Tutor. Brain Geyser into, I believe, Snap. Yes, Snap. So I attack with both. I could try to Fatal Push here, but they'll just Snap in response. They go ahead and snap their Cloud of Fae. I think they forget that I have Flample on my Spawn of Mayhem. Spawn of Mayhem does 1 over the top of Peregrine Drake and puts them to 0. I think that was just a play mistake on their part. I think they had to block with both. I could have tried going for a Fatal Push, but what will happen if I try to Fatal Push is they'll just bounce one or the other cards, probably the Spawn of Mayhem, and then just chump block. And counter the Spawn of Mayhem on the backswing. So I just attack here and wait for them to tap the mana. Once they've tapped the mana, then I can feel free to pretty much to remove the Cloud of Fae if I want to. Although it's just a die in combat. Keep in mind, Fatal Push does not work against Peregrine Drake. That is a 5-drop, even though it's a little guy. But pretty cool games against High Tide. Kind of got to showcase what SUI's supposed to do. And the funny thing is SUI was originally designed to beat up on High Tide. This deck, this initial deck design when it was a 60 card 4 of deck, way back in the day, was designed to beat up on the Time Spiral High Tide decks. And to this date, it still does so quite well. All right, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for the next game. Alrighty, guys, we are back. It's a fine opening hand. It's got 2 1-drops, 2-drop, Clutch of Brutality for some disruption, Tomb of Arami for the long game, if need be. Play out Gravecrawler, so if they want to remove it with non-white removal, then we can possibly get it back next turn by playing the Carnophage out. End up getting a Prowler down. Opponent goes ahead and Inquisitions us. cast an Orb's Chant so we cannot cast spells. So we just play our land out and attack, put him down to 12. Opponent goes ahead and casts Doomsday here, putting themselves down to 6. Now, I can put them to 1, but I cannot put them to 0 next turn unless I draw, Bone Splitter, Collective Brutality is already cast, never mind. I'm trying to think of what else I can cast here that would get them dead. I don't think there's much. I couldn't actually bestow the Gnarled Scarhide on either of these cards either. Plus, they can just pitch cards as well. They end up pitching a Demonic Tutor here just to stay alive. I cast out an Ammit Eternal. They chart a course into their pile, and then recognize they're mana short. They got Gush, but they're actually short on mana to actually execute their win condition here. The problem was going to be drawing their last card. That was kind of their limitation that they had. So we managed to get them here. We got lucky. They either mispiled or they just didn't have the right resources in hand to actually set off this Doomsday pile they set up. Probably needed one more turn to go, and they did not have one more turn. This is one of those games like Doomsday is where you definitely want to win the die roll for starters. And 2, I've really been considering dropping the curve down even further and going to 25 lands and playing Karavak's Spite and Soul Spike in the deck. The reason I would do that is because it gives me a 4 and a 5 damage burn spell. To be able to finish the game off on the best of draws turns sooner. It gives 2 more ounce to doing that. And that's pretty powerful, right? So if Ammit Eternal had been a 5 damage burn spell, now given Karavak's Spite exiles everything on my side of the board, so I would have to be not playing around anything, and it's obvious they did have a counter spell. Then I would have lost the game if they counterspelled that, more than likely, after they doomsdayed. But Karavak's Spite and Soul Spike both kind of allow you to kind of get wins out of nowhere, like get those turn 3 wins, or have higher consistency turn 3 wins, which turn 3 tends to be a little tougher for Suicide Black. It tends to be more of a turn 4 deck, in general. But I would like to give it more ounce on its best draws to actually have a significant number of turn 3 wins as well. So that's kind of one of the downsides you see here is like Storm and Doomsday are just about as fast or faster than this deck is. They're really close. It may be worth looking at adding more disruption just to increase the ability for the clock to actually matter, increase my available time by a turn. But it also comes down to draw too, right? If they have to transmute a bunch of times to find like the Doomsday and they have to Trinket Mage to find Black Lotus, then generally speaking, you can get enough attacks in that actually they just die. So it's really a coin toss. Both literally you want to go first, and figuratively from the standpoint that it really depends on how much tutoring they have to do to actually set up the win condition. Whereas I don't really have to tutor in my deck. All my cards are fairly similar. The biggest differential in my hands is going to be, do I have fast mana or do I not? Can I accelerate, and dump my hand on turn 1, or can I not? And if I can, generally speaking, that's going to increase my clock by a whole turn cycle. That's how you get your turn 3 and turn 4 wins of this deck. Turn 3, 3.5 wins, or 3.5 turn wins. Generally speaking, the average speeds to be 4 to 5, 4.5 probably, without fast mana. So there you have it. Opponent just misstacked here, or did not have the cards available to set up the pile they wanted to set up. So we managed to get the win here. Quick pause, guys. Be back momentarily for game number 2 versus Doomsday. Alrighty, guys. We are back for a Doomsday matchup. Alright, so this hand's unkeepable. Mulligan. This hand's fine. It's not the best. It's not the worst. I end up getting rid of 1 land, because I figure I'll probably draw 1. Yep, and I do. I go ahead and fetch here because I realistically do not want a 4th land. I just go ahead and get a Night Market Lookout down. The reason I want to do this is because this card gains me life. Why that's relevant is because Doomsday is a Storm and or Labman combo deck. So, if you can gain a little bit of incremental life, sometimes it means that they have to wait longer in order to storm off. I draw into a Grafted War Gear, but I go ahead and cast out the Rune Raider right now. That could have been wrong on my part. The problem is going to be they're probably going to get Doomsday off before I can get them to a low enough life total where they can't cast it anymore. It's possible I actually wanted to put the Grafted War Gear into play, though. They go ahead and top here. I do have Slaughter Pact at this point, though, which is kind of nice. That means if they go for the Doomsday and they're going for the Labman kill, I can possibly Slaughter Pact the Labman. But they're going to have counter spells in their deck. They're going to have silences, Orm's Chants. We already saw Orm's Chant. So, I mean, the possibility of this Slaughter Pact not being cast is very high as well. They go ahead and Doomsday here, and I figure I'm probably dead. They go down to 4. They cannot pass the turn at this point. Go ahead and flip top. No, they don't. Oh, that's right. Yeah, they don't. They use Angel's Grace here. I'm trying to remember. I'm like, did Moto just screw up? They use Angel's Grace, so I can't hurt them. I just hit them down to 1. So opponent is at 1. They cast Silence, which means I cannot use my Slaughter Pact. Go ahead and Gush. Cast or play out the Lion's Eye Diamond. Cast Yawgmoth's Will. Sacking the Lion's Eye Diamond, getting Preordain out of their hand, replay the Lion's Eye Diamond, sack it for mana, draw into the next card in the pile, Labman, Gush, and Preordain for the win. Pretty sweet deck when you get to see it work this way. It's a very cool deck. Silence was a beating here because I did have the Slaughter Pact to kind of stop this. But then again, we also don't know what they have left in their hand. With this much mana, they very well could have a counter spell at this point in time. Do not know. They probably do. But not that they need it. After Silence resolves, I don't think they need it. But, so we get had by it here. This is a turn 6 win, though, so it's not a real fast win. It was just that they had some pretty solid disruption against us to kind of like bide time. Alright, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for the next game. Oh, another interesting note that I didn't mention. Angel's Grace is not a card that I see all the time in Doomsday lists. Generally speaking, if you see Angel's Grace, it tends to mean that they are playing an Ant version or Ad Nauseam version of the deck, which is pretty sweet. I think in this next game we actually get to see the Ad Nauseam is in their deck. So quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily. Alrighty, guys, we are back. Hand was not good enough. I ended up mulling it down. I'm not really happy with this hand either, but it has a couple 1-drops, and we're going to have to try to get there with it. When I see that I'm going to have to keep a 1-lander, I am not very excited about it. I draw to a 3-drop, really bad. Dome for 2, they play Sleight of Hand. It really depends on how strong their hand is. Now, when I hit a land this turn, I'm like, alright, I can still win this game. I'm not completely out of it. I do go ahead and, I believe, attempt to cast out the Graveyard Marshal because I smell a counter. I wanted to actually cast the Mardu Skull Hunter to knock a card out of their hand, but I did not get to there. Go ahead and get the Skull Hunter down. They Mystical Tutor for, I believe, Angel's Grace. So trying to set up Ant here is what my guess is. But they don't have a white source, so they are obviously speculating a bit on that. I go ahead and get an attack in here, put them down to 6. I go ahead and cast this, trying to get a counter spell out of their hand. They don't counter. I look at their hand and notice that it has Cabal Ritual, Ad Nauseam, Labman, Echoing Truth, and Angel's Grace. The only real relevant card here is Ad Nauseam. That card can kill me. If they hit a white source and can Angel's Grace plus Ad Nauseam, I lose the game. Echoing Truth can buy them a whole turn cycle, but if they're casting Echoing Truth at the loss of a card just to buy one more turn, I think I'm fine with that, knowing for a fact that if they draw into a white source, I will just lose the game to Ad Nauseam plus Angel's Grace. That's just, they'll draw the whole deck, and I'm sure with their whole deck drawn, they can find a way to win, i.e. cast Labman, cast Gush, and win the game. Cast Black Lotus, cast Labman off Black Lotus, cast Gush off their 2 islands for free, draw into 0 cards after Ad Nauseaming their whole deck, and win the game. That's how they would end up doing it. So they're very close to winning. Luckily, we were able to kind of put them under enough clock here, and also have this very timely duress draw to knock the Ad Nauseam out of their hand. All right, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for more gameplay with the Suicide Black deck. Alright, guys, we are back. This is my opening hand in this game. It's not exceptional. It doesn't have a 1-drop. I kind of wish it had. Opponent plays on a Hallowed Fountain. No clue what's going on here. And then they play out a True Name Nemesis, and I'm in some trouble here. So I play out a Gifted Aetherborn, which means they may not attack with their True Name Nemesis, because they may want to block this thing. They attack anyways. That's cool. I think I end up attacking them back. No, I draw very well. I draw into a Grafted War Gear, which is a huge pickup. This is going to be pretty tough to race because this is Lifelink and Death Touch, so I'm able to put them down to 14 and go back up to 21. They have a card engine in the form of Sig River Cutthroat. This is a card I could try playing in this deck. It just doesn't hit hard enough. So I've gained 10 life this game. I should be damn near dead. I get to use the Douthie Slayer here, or get the Douthie Slayer into play, which is pretty good because it can't be blocked. and it's also a 5-power attacker. They attack with everything. I do the math here. It doesn't make sense to block the SIG and then remove the counters from this thing. It just makes sense to block this thing. It's the same damage either way. It's block 2 here or take 2 additional here. Cast out Vendilion Click, see nothing. Unfortunately, Vendilion Click means they can block Arami. My game plan this game has been to basically get the 5/5 Legendary Demon token into play. Luckily, they did tap their Strip Mine, though, so they didn't blow up one of my lands, so now I can still do it. For some reason, they attack... Well, I think they just make a play here. They attack with their Vendilion Click, and I just assume at this point that they probably have a Cryptic Commander or Bounce spell. They allow me to block here, and I'm just figuring at some point they're just going to bounce my Arami, and I'm just going to lose. I blow up a green land just to see if maybe they have like a fog effect. They have nothing. So just a play error on Croc's part. It happens. It's unfortunate when it does happen because, I think he probably in paper would have intentionally would have left his Vendilion Click back. But, yep, Vendilion Click flies. Arami does not have Flample, so I would have definitely lost here. And even if it did, I think they were at 11. I have to go recheck the life total. No, they weren't at 11. They were at 9. I guess it wouldn't have mattered. If it had Trample, it wouldn't have mattered. But it does not. So, end up getting lucky here. Opponent makes a play error, and we just managed to punish their error. So, yep. Alright, guys. Quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for the next game in this match set. Alrighty, guys. We are back. So, we're playing as Merfolk. Yeah, I keep this. I don't know if it's good. Well, actually, this hand's good. What am I saying? So, when I draw Liliana, I'm like, yeah, we're doing that. Liliana is going to be a lot better in what's probably more of an aggro control deck. Being able to knock out their threats is really big, and being able to get Liliana down under counter magic is huge. So they have to ditch Planeswalker here, play on a land, say go. If they're playing the counter spell game, I think I'm okay with that. If they want to counter spells, we'll continue just to discard our hands. I just go ahead and attempt to cast out the Gifted Aetherborn. It resolves, which is kind of shocking to me. I actually discard the Inquisition here, because I think Snuff Out is going to be more relevant. I think they're going to try to land a creature. They're probably going to try to land like their shittiest creature first so that we have to use Liliana to kill it. And then, I probably won't kill it. I'll probably just continue to plus Liliana and then use the Snuff Out on it. They cast a Vendilion Click. I instantly just blow this thing up because there's nothing else in my hand they can possibly get. Which means at this point I'm hellbent, but I have a Liliana on board, and my opponent is actually losing real cards every turn. They cast a Aether Vial, which can be pretty spooky. I go ahead and fetch here just because I don't want to draw more lands. It is a very marginal amount of value, but it is some value. Opponent goes ahead and taps one of my lands. Not really relevant to me because I can cast all of my cards in my deck at this point, or any one card I can cast in my deck. Continue to Hammer Fist their hand. I'm not going to use Liliana to try to blow up their permanents here. I'm going to continue to attack their hand and just, say go. They get a Merfolk Branchwalker here. Play on a Coppola. Draw into another swamp. Go ahead and sack one of their creatures and attack for lethal, if I'm not mistaken. No, just down to 1. I trade the Reaver Drone for the Coppola. They draw a land for the turn and have nothing else going on, so they go ahead and pack it in. Alright, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for the next game. Alright, guys, we are back. Sorry, I had a pause button issue. Anyways, this is the first hand I keep. I probably shouldn't have kept this. I keep an opening 7 with just a Black Lotus and no mana sources. If I high roll land on top, it's really good. Then I don't know what I'm playing against, right? I'm playing against Gosman here. They're playing Red Deck Wins. This is not a good hand against Red Deck Wins. It just doesn't have removal. Well, it has, Collective Brutality, but it doesn't have mana. Against, a blue deck, you could possibly get away with this hand, because, they may not be able to remove this stuff. But this is not good. I basically just dump my hand into play and hope that it's good enough. It's not going to be. Play out Mountain, play out another creature that's better than my whole board. I don't draw a land again. I get an attack with the Gnarled Scarhide because it's not blocking anything. They Forked Bolt me. I blocked the Falcorath Gorger, but they have Mutagenic Growth, and now I have a Sarcomancy in play with nothing else, and it's doing a damage to me a turn. I'm taking 4. They have 3 cards left. I'm very, very dead. So I go ahead and pack it in. Greedy keep on my part. I think in some matchups that keep could be paid off pretty highly, because, it does put 5 power onto the board on turn 1, which, is definitely worth consideration. If it hits lands, it also has, if it casts further spells, it has the Shadow Alley Denizen, which means that I can get through damage through a lot of different threats that an opponent may play. Unfortunately, when you're playing against a deck that is just as efficient as you are and has burn to remove your crappy small threats, that hand is not good. Not even remotely close to good. Probably the antithesis of good. Which we can see here. We get utterly trounced. And that's kind of why I said this deck is a 30-70 deck, right? Because like I've kind of shown like the deck just beating down on other decks. But like against aggro decks, it's really not that great because its creatures are just not El Primo creatures. And it doesn't run a ton of removal. I've kind of cut the removal down to very minimal removal because I want it to be really good at beating what it's supposed to be good at beating, which is control and combo. And it probably has a 45-55 or 55-45, like not a match neutral, but a pretty close to match neutral in one direction or the other against most mid-range builds. But against aggro decks, it's just not good. This is like an aggro deck that is bad against its brethren. So anyways, you see me get trounced here. I'm going to go to a quick pause. We'll be back for game number 2 against Gosman on Red Deck Wins. Alright guys, we are back. Mulligan down to 6 here. I keep a 1-lander again, but I can play my threats this time. I actually have land, which is nice. I unfortunately do not draw into a land. Opponent takes here, which is cool by me. Opponent has a Mana Crypt start, which is not good. They have Braid. I block here. They have Kari Zev left. I have yet to hit another land, so I'm kind of getting in some trouble territory here. But I do have a Death's Shadow, which is hopefully going to be good enough. They have Lava Darts. They're going to blow this Dread Wanderer up again. I don't have the mana to rebuy it. They end up just using the Ramanap Ruins here. Attack me again for 3. Put me down to 12. I just draw into a Bone Splitter. They use their Lava Dart on my dude and kill it. Their Mana Crypt has been very bloodthirsty this game. It's done them a lot of damage, because I have not done most of the damage to them, if any. I think I've done 0 damage to them. Their Mana Crypt's doing some work, but Death Shadow is now out, is at 4/4. I go ahead and cast the Inquisition here. They make an interesting play decision here. They end up incinerating my face, and then Gal Blasting my face, which means the Death Shadow is now well out of burn range. I cast it down as a 4/4 because I thought it was too much of a risk not to. I guess what I mean is if they had attacked me with Kari Zev and then had like 3 burn spells, then I just die. And justice is served. I don't know if justice was served here, but something happened here. They kind of missed for a few turns. They drew Price of Progress, which is an utterly dead card in this matchup. I mean, I guess like I probably have less non-basics than they do. I have Arami, and then I have Mishra's Factory and Mutavault. That's it, really. I mean, I have fetch lands, but they don't like count. But, we're at 2 life. The Price of Progress they drew is not going to be enough to do it. And despite being able to put us to 2, they are very dead to a lethal Death Shadow on the following turn. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back for Game 3 against Gosma. 2 pretty spectacular games. You had a Black Lotus draw that just utterly got trounced in the first game because it was just not the right draw. It was not the right hand to keep against Red Deck Wins whatsoever. And then you kind of got to see me upset this game where I kind of got a little bit lucky, and my opponent, had a pretty strong opening with the Mana Crypt and like all the removal against my creatures. But Mana Crypt did a lot of damage to them. They did a significant amount of damage to me, and I was able to get a Death Shadow down. Now that said, I think going back, kind of breaking down their line of play, I think if they had used Incinerate and Galvanic Blast to kill off the Death Shadow, they probably would have won this game because I'm banking on drawing lands, and I'm not really drawing lands here. This is a 1-land keep, 1 land the whole game on turn 7, 1 land. So I mean, I think that can happen with SUI. I mean, it's running 27. It's very mana light. I mean, I guess it's running technically 30 mana sources, but it's a very mana light deck. So from time to time that happens, and it's not like you really want to cast Bitter Blossom in this matchup very much. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for the next game in this match set. Alrighty, guys, we are back. Yeah, hand's pretty good, actually. This is like probably the best hand I've kept so far against Red Deck Wins. It's just a good, decent, consistent hand, and that just made it a ton better. I go ahead and just look at their hand first. They have Incendiary Flow, Burning Tree Emissary, Harsh Mentor, and Kari Zev. They cast out the Harsh Mentor here. I get the Drana down, get in there for 2, cast out Kari Zev. Go ahead and just cast a bunch of things and stuff. But this is actually a play error on my part. What I should have done is I I misread Gnarled Scarhide. I thought Gnarled Scarhide was actually Tormented Hero, which comes into play tapped. What I should have done is actually not cast the Unis Prowler. I should have actually cast Gnarled Scarhide plus Mogis Marauder, and then given everything haste and just gotten through for 1,000,000,000 damage. Basically made it impossible for them to race me. They go ahead and just pack it in here. I guess they're out of gas, and they don't want to lose their Karizev here to the first. Actually, these both have first strike, so this would actually kill this, but this can come back next turn. This would be a 3-4, and on the following turn, I can just Mogis' Marauder to kind of just win the game. But I have pretty decentish blockers on the backswing. But this is a misplay on my part. It should have been Gnarled Scarhide. A misplay kind of prompted by a misread of a card. I thought this was for some reason Tormented Hero, and I'm like, oh, that comes into play tapped. I can't possibly play that and then cast Mogis' Marauder right now. But it was pretty apparently the right play. So it should have been this plus this, not this and this. I think, I don't know. That was bad. But anyways, guys, this was the game against Red Deck Wins. Got very lucky and won this game. I do not think this is a consistent result. I think winning this matchup is very lucky. And I also had like a Black Lotus start that lost. So I mean, I thought I was lucky in that hand, but that was definitely not. That was not good. But got very lucky in game number 2. Also, kind of exacerbated by some play decisions by my opponent, who opted not to burn out the Death Shadow and tried to burn me out instead. I think they had some temerity about their own Mana Crypt killing them. And it may have, but I mean, I doubt it. I think their draws are generally going to be more alive than my own, especially considering I just needed mana so I could operate, and they have a Menace creature in play. But here, I think we did get him here. This is just, we got him. But this was probably, honestly, the best keep in this matchup. You definitely want, 2 lands, generally, and you want to keep a full opening grip of 7. And hitting a Mox Jet is just cheddar because it means you're going to be that much faster. All right. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for more gameplay with Suicide Black. Alrighty, guys, we are back. Playing as Train Boy here. Had to mull that first hand. No lands, but a Dark Ritual. This hand's fine. It's got 3 mana sources in it, and it's got some pretty decent 2-drops. I believe I go ahead and passed out the Vampire here. Nope, I cast out the Bearer. Actually, I guess that makes sense. The Flyer. Flyers tend to be a little better. Alright, we see a Mishra's Workshop, which is spooky, and we're probably playing against Academy is what my first guess is. This is an Academy deck. I'm going to get to draw an extra card off Rune Raider here, and I've got 5 power on board, which is not horrible. Go ahead and smash in there for 5 more. Just cast out a bunch of little dudes here. Could have tried casting out the Plague Belcher here, but I kind of wanted to just see more of what my opponent's up to. They cast Memory Jar. If I remember correctly, I have a very lucky draw and draw Phyrexian Revoker here. Yeah, I'm just a luck sack. Draw Revoker, name Memory Jar, and smash them for almost lethal. Again, this is another matchup where they can just have some ridiculously fast draws, and it may be impossible for the aggro decks to beat them. But oftentimes in these draws, where I don't manage to close the game out on the turn that I really want to against combo, they're at 4 or less life. If you look at their life total, it's 4 or less, right? So if opposed to having played Phyrexian Revoker, if I had cast Caravax Spite or Soul Spike, I would have just won the game without having to pass the turn back to them. And I think that was on my turn 3. I don't recall now. I believe that was on my turn 3 that we just did there. And, that would have been a turn 3 kill if I'd had either of those cards. Now, I'm not saying, you're always going to have them, but, I mean, if I had it as opposed to just, having Revoker or any other card in my hand, I'd be much happier, right? That said, I would not cut Revoker for either of those cards. Revoker needs to be in this deck. But those cards, I think, are cards that, in the future, I want to look to try to find a way to get in the deck, because the deck just kind of lacks the reach that Red Deck Wins has to close games out effectively on turn 3. But those 2 cards kind of do offer that capability a lot better than just creatures, which are inherently latent but consistent damage, but they're slow, right? So anyways, guys, quick pause, and we'll be back momentarily with game number 2 against Train Boy on Academy something. Alrighty, guys, you're back. Playing against Train Boy here. This hand looks great. Got a Dark Confidant, got a bunch of threats. Can't complain here. Go ahead and cast out the Diregraph Ghoul. I don't plan on blocking against Train Boy's deck, so the not blocking claws are coming into play tapped is not a big deal. They keep on fetching here. Play on a Sylvan Library. Not a card that really worries me. It's going to smooth out their draw, but if they're going to try to draw cards off of it, I do not think that's going to go well for them. Actually, as opposed to playing out the Dark Confidant, I just put 4 additional power on the board. I think 4 more power is more relevant than having Dark Confidant as a card engine online. Right now, mana is going to be my constraint, not cards per se. They play on a Signet here and land, and tell me to go. Now, at this point, I just go ahead and get the Vampire Lacerator and the Carrion Feeder down. If they opt to try to use like an Electrolyze or like, they have like I don't know, like a Radiant Flames or something like that, I can just sack a bunch of stuff to like Carrion Feeder or even like a Pyroclasm. I can sack all my stuff to Carrion Feeder and make it, a 5/5 here. Yeah. But anyways, they have nothing. They didn't find anything with the Sylvan Library, and they're just dead to the Bashtoids, the all one-drop army that we have over here. Anyways, guys, quick pause. I'm going to be back for one more game here momentarily. Alrighty, guys, we are back. I'll be playing against Storm this time. This hand's acceptable. It's not really exciting, but it can cast a 2-drop on turn 1, so I think it's a keeper. I don't want to draw land on my first turn, so I'm going to probably fetch immediately. They go ahead and gamble here, getting rid of a Trinket Mage, which means they probably got to keep what they were looking for. I doubt it was Trinket Mage. So they probably either found Demonic Tutor or Black Lotus. My guess would be probably Demonic Tutor now, in hindsight. And actually, I know at this point. Yeah, it was DT. I get to see their hand with Lifebane Zombie, but Lifebane Zombie, unfortunately, does not attack the hand. I just go ahead and Dark Ritual here, play out the Carrion Feeder, sack the Tomb of Arami with the mana. So I have a 5/5, and they're pretty dead next turn. But unfortunately, they're able to combo me off this turn on turn 4. So unfortunately, just a turn slow. This is one of those games where you can definitely see that the die roll going to Storm definitely gave them the edge, gave them a pretty big advantage here. Now, if we'd had the die roll, we probably won this game. Because we didn't, we're going to lose. They're Tainted Pacting, and they're probably finding Yawgmoth's Will. The most we can hope for out of that is that they exile components they need, but because we know they already have Lion's Eye Diamond, Black Lotus, and Tendrils, we know we're dead, and they get us for Lethal Storm here. Alright guys, quick pause. Back momentarily for the next game. Alrighty guys, we are back. Hand's acceptable. No hand attack, but it has a very fast clock. It has 1-drops for days. That's all it has is 1-drops. And a Lonely Spinethopter. I cast out the Night Market Lookout first because I think the life gain could be relevant against Storm. Being at 21 means they have to get one more Storm count in order to kill us. Not a huge game, but I mean, if you get to 23, it can be a pretty important little detail. They play a tapped Sulphur Falls here, which means they probably fetched incorrectly. I think they actually say that in the chat. I'm just going to cast out 3 power here, so both my other 1-drops. Basically, whatever hits the hardest, I want to hit them with right now. They play on a Pentid Prism. Just go ahead and get the Douthie Slayer online here. I don't take damage to cast the Spinethopter. Go up 23, which means that their Storm count needs to be at least 11 now. They attempt to go for it, Beseech the Queen, sack a land with Lake of the Dead, cast DT, Yawgwill, but they are mana short due to having used Cabal Ritual on 7 cards in Graveyard, with Cabal Ritual being one of them. As soon as it's cast, it comes out of the Graveyard, which means it's down to 6. So they're going to be short mana to actually do their combo kill here. They have Cathartic Reunion. They have a lot of cool cards going off here. They Thoughtseize to kill themselves, and that's it. So we got them in this game. On to game number 3. Alrighty, guys, we are back. Alright, this hand's not good, but I don't think I want to mull this either. I did not want to see a land, though. I mean, I did keep a 5-lander. One of them is kind of a threat, though. I actually don't opt to cast out the Master here because I think Master I want to cast out the turn that I'm going to kill them. Or the next turn that I kill them. So I hit them here, and then the next turn they're dead, right? So I have 10 power on board. I have 11 power on board. They go for a Tainted Pact here with Pentad Prism in play. And they're probably looking for Black Lotus here, would be my guess. If I recall this game correctly. Yeah, Black Lotus is what they find. They have Lake of the Dead, sack. Make a bunch of mana, have Auriac Salvagers. I just asked them here. This is going to go through a couple iterations and I'll concede. It doesn't actually show you the full win con, but they have Infinite Storm, right? Because they can recast Lotus with Auriac Salvagers. The way this works is it costs white and 1, return artifact with converted mana costs 1 or less from your graveyard to your hand. Black Lotus costs 0, so they can return it. Black Lotus makes 3 mana. This only costs 2 to make, so they net 1 mana every time they do it. So they have Infinite Storm and Infinite Mana of all colors. They informed me and they showed me their hand afterwards. They had Diabolic Tutor in their hand. I think that's what it's called, Diabolic Tutor. Yeah, Diabolic Tutor, which can, at that point in time, with Infinite Storm, find 10 rolls and just win the game. So they got me. We were one turn away. Again, it kind of comes down to die roll, right? Because if we had won the die roll in the first game, we won that game. And if we won the die roll in this game, we won this game. Now, we didn't really keep a spectacular hand in this last one, but I don't think we can really hope to be that much faster than turn 4 kill. I mean, you can get the turn 3 kill, but you're not going to mulligan for a turn 3 kill, because that involves mulliganing into Black Lotus and Dark Ritual, and I don't think you should have to do that. I mean, like, it could be that I wanted to mulligan down into like some more disruption, but I had a hand that worked. It had a pretty solid plan. It followed the kind of the guidelines of the plan, and I think if they'd had to transmute it all, and if they hadn't had like Lake of the Dead or like the big mana start, I mean, this is a fast kill for them too. Turn 4 is it's consistent without disruption. But it's not always assured, right? Like, sometimes they need to tutor a couple times. And in this case, all they had to do is play their lands out, play the Pen-Headed Prism out, and tutor, and they just had it, you know? That's good. But I think, realistically here, if the die roll had gone in my favor, I probably won both games. And that's not taking anything away from Arakasi at all. And I think Storm's a great deck. But this is one of those matchups where I think die roll really matters. And what I want to tie it into for assessment of the deck in the games is not that you should get lucky all the time and just win die rolls. That'd be sweet if you could, but you can't always do that. But I think, I likely need to relook the build to look for more disruption against the extremely fast speed combo decks like Storm and like Doomsday. Because I think the matchup's not quite as assured as I would like it to be. It feels like it probably should be pretty decent. I think it should be 50-50. It just really, again, comes out of die roll. But I think it could be made to be better if I went with the route I've been talking about kind of throughout this video, i.e. going down to 25 lands, cutting probably 2-3 drops, adding in 2 additional 1-drop creatures, or a 1-drop and a 2-drop creature, and then finding room for Kaervek Spite and Soul Spike. Basically a free 4 damage burn spell, 4 damage drain spell, and a 5 damage burn spell that blows up everything on the board and deletes my hand. Neither of those cards are like really good, but when you're playing that few lands, and you have that many cards, most of which you're probably not going to be able to push through your mana funnel in time. I think they can be very powerful because they can end the game a turn sooner, on a higher statistical probability. Which I think would edge it more advantage towards my deck in this matchup if I was able to get that build correct. Now, I haven't figured that build out yet. I'm not quite there on it. I'm going to keep on working on this list, probably not as fastidiously as I have in the last 24 hours. But I do really enjoy SUI, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap it there, guys, with this match here. I played quite a few more with the deck. The deck is definitely over 50%. I think I lost one other game today. I lost this game and I lost one other game today. I can't forget against whom. I'll go digging for it at some point. But it does really well. Like, I think the deck is actually pretty good for what it's intended to do, and actually has a lot more play to it than you might think. I mean, it looks like a bunch of silly 1-drops at first sight, and it kind of is. But I think the sequencing and kind of like the interplay of the deck and really the keep decisions are pretty important when you're playing it, and knowing what you can keep against certain matchups. It's possible that we wanted to look to mulligan this last hand here, but at the end of the day, very, very fun deck to play. Has some significant drawbacks, but also, kind of, highlights some of the exciting stuff that kind of, Magic's about, right? Like, it's a higher variance deck, but like when it high rolls strong. You get to see some pretty spectacular stuff and some goofy stuff too, right? I mean, like, who cast a Master of the Feast on turn 1 off of Black Lotus? I don't know. To me, that's cool. Like, it's really cool. Like, I don't know. Maybe not to everyone, but I think it's pretty fun to actually like see some hilarious stuff cast off Black Lotus. I like to have the fairest of them all contest with that card, and or Dark Ritual. But anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed the content on Suicide Black. It's a deck I'll continue to work on, and I think eventually I'll get the build down to about 25 lands. Unfortunately, relatively soon, the London Mulligan rule will be leaving MTGO, and we'll be going back to the Paris Mulligan rule. I really do hope that they adopt the London Mulligan rule after playing with it in some Eternal formats that include Vintage, Legacy, and Canadian Highlander here. I've been very impressed with that mulligan rule. I think it definitely benefits skill. Like, there's always an important decision you get to make with it. Like, even when you're like doing the Paris mulligan, I feel like it gives you a little more command over variance. But oftentimes you can just get, as they say, screwed by the shuffler. With the Paris or the London mulligan rule, I honestly think it takes a lot of that out of it, and there's a lot more player decision making. And even if you get trounced, which happens from time to time, like, you at least made some relevant decisions and set yourself up in the best position to win. So as far as the mulligan goes, I love it. Like, I really, really love it. I've heard a lot of naysaying on it, but honestly, like, after having played with it in multiple different formats to include limited as well, I think it's great. I think it's kind of the way that WotC should go with it, and I think it's great for Canadian Highlander too. Like, I've had a lot of fun playing with this mulligan rule in this format. That said, this is a deck that I really wanted to get my testing, and that's why I kind of pushed real hard on testing this deck under the London mulligan rule, because I think this is a deck that gets significantly worse when it goes back to Paris mulligan rules. I think it generally has to go up a little bit higher on lands, and it's a little more variance laden when you're playing it that way. Now, when you get to keep an opening 7, or when you get to have 7 and choose down to 5 or choose down to 6, the deck plays a lot better. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed the content. I really enjoyed making this one. I really enjoyed building this deck. It's kind of one of the decks that I always thought was really cool from back in the day, even though I always thought it was kind of a junky deck. And it kind of still is a junky deck. It's just got a bunch of junky cards, but that's kind of the fun of it too, right? Like, when you get to Canadian Highlander, there's kind of a lot of stock lists. Like, you have your Jess guy, which I think is probably one of the better decks. You have your Stormed list. And there's some variations to all of them, but like, when you get into building an archetype that really has kind of either been forgotten or is neglected, you really get to do some kind of cool deck building. Like, you get to do a lot of research on just all of the cards over time, because you have to play some cards that really don't see play in anything else. Like, a Master of the Feast is really not played anywhere else other than in a deck like this. And I think that's pretty cool. Sarcomancy, probably not played in many other places. Maybe Black Mold plays this card, but probably not. There's just better cards than Black Mold over Sarcomancy. So very, very fun deck to build and play with, guys. I hope you enjoyed the content. Again, to note, this is not a Tier 1 deck. This is kind of just a brew of mine that I'm trying to make as good as I possibly can. And honestly, I think it's getting close. I think it's getting close to being probably the best deck that it can be with the current cards available across all of Magic the Gathering. So anyways, guys, take care and enjoy.